History shapes everything we do and everything we believe. Across the centuries, a few have written the stories of humanity, and in doing so, have silenced countless others. Chokepoints Through Time is where those voices are heard again. Join Dr. Wayne Sedlak, linguist, scholar of ancient languages and history, pastor, former missionary to Africa, graduate school dean, and professor, as he opens the door to our forgotten past. From the tablets of lost civilizations to the chronicles of empires long fallen, discover the truths history tried to hide and the forces that still shape our world today. Chokepoints Through Time, a journey through the pivotal moments of mankind's story. This is history as you've never heard it before. And now, here is Dr. Wayne Sedlak.
Hello again. I'd like to welcome you to Chokepoints Through Time. We have a very important show, in fact, and with it, I've got an important announcement. In fact, you'll hear me make this announcement on again, off again throughout the summer. Before we begin, I'd like to make the announcement, and it's simply this. In September, we have an economics course, a biblical economics course. It begins on Tuesday, September 8th. It'll be Tuesday and Thursday, every Tuesday and Thursday, except holidays, throughout the year. And it's a course that can be taken by homeschoolers, but we find that many adults take our courses and have been taking them for years, all across the United States and Canada, in fact, around the world. I'd like to welcome you to our course in economics. Now, I know the danger is, economics, isn't that called the dismal science? Yeah, actually it is. In the hands of the secularists, it is dismal. Two things I want you to realize. Economics is a function of good stewardship. God commands good stewardship out of us. That stewardship translates into moral decision-making, uprightness, and it translates into leadership. Men and women of renown. And I did say women. Look at Proverbs 31 woman, Bathsheba. I'm going to deal with her from an economic standpoint in the not-too-distant future, showing you that Bathsheba, and I don't know where she got her understanding in economics, but she created 3 businesses, kept her husband David in the gates, raised a son Solomon, who changed the world with his understanding of economics as his mother taught him. Now you see all that from the scriptures. She became a woman of renown. Her husband David, too, was an economist. He understood economics. And of course, being a great king, he was a great general and a great king, but his administration wasn't plagued with the kind of political intrigue, money-wise, of men that, corrupt politicians who love your money. So that's one aspect of sound economy. If you don't understand sound economy in the Bible as God gives it, your stewardship will be compromised. You'll be more easily flanked by evil. Our country is, in fact, we're going to touch upon that today. Our country is being flanked by evil. It's the one area in particular of the church that Christians don't get as readily, and we could lose our nation for it. So good stewardship hangs in the balance. But there's more to it. Your ability to interpret the scriptures oftentimes hinges on your understanding of sound economics. It's appropriate that I give an illustration of that. Many, many Christians in 2,000 years have been taken by the idea that Acts chapter 4 through 6 teaches of biblical communism. I writhe in pain when I hear there's so-called biblical communism or biblical socialism. No, there's not. Barnabas gave a house that helped fund Well, the apostles put aside a fund, and they had things in common. First of all, it's private. That's not socialism. Second of all, it was designed for an emergency for the people of the church in Jerusalem. You see, many had been at Pentecost, had been converted. They brought their families out of the diaspora. They came to learn about Christ from the apostles. Well, the Jewish hierarchy ostracized them. These were Jews being more or less kicked out of the economy of Jerusalem. A worse persecution would follow, but for then, they didn't have jobs or the most menial of tasks. They didn't have jobs. They didn't have homes. They were living with other Christians in the city and in the surrounding areas. So what is having a fund in common? Well, Leviticus 27 is the specific chapter that was being used by the apostles and by Barnabas. In fact, Leviticus is named, in fact, for the Levites. Barnabas, we're told in Acts, a Levite gave his house, gave the value of his house to the apostles. They used that to begin to fund such a large amount of money needed to help those in distress. As a Levite, the Levites had, well, in the Old Testament, the Levites were, in fact, the priests of Levites took care of the temple when that function was gone. But Levites were also deacons. The diaconal office is created from the Levitical model, and they were pastors. Now, there are other aspects to the Levitical office too, judges, for example, but the New Testament takes those applications. The reason I say that is because Barnabas, being a Levite, understood charity relief. He's an expert. That's what Levites were to be and to do, at least some of them. Leviticus 27 was the chapter, in fact, that even states concerning a house being given to a fund, which the Levites then would take and put into that amount of money held in common. And yet, and this will lead us into our lesson, yet the Bible strongly emphasizes free enterprise, but it's a biblically based free enterprise. In other words, the Bible speaks in terms of private ownership. Profitability is a function of risk-taking and reward. The noble activity of the laborer, of the risk-taker called the entrepreneur, all those are spoken of and much, much more in the Scriptures. And so as we go to our course in September, you'll see that the laws of sound economy, I call them the laws of human action. They're actual laws emanating right out of the psychology of each one of us. Laws of supply and demand. Law of marginal utility. Say's law. Issues concerning incentive, valuation, store of value. What is money? Is money what we have now? Or is that currency that's called fiat? Does the Bible know of these distinctions? And what of that cancer called inflation? Isaiah refers to it. This and a whole lot more will help us to understand life. We've had many become entrepreneurs over the years. I can't promise that. That's going to be up to you who appropriate the course. But I've had many students in 40 years who've become entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs. And God bless them. They've done well for them and their families and their churches. Entrepreneurship, the science of money, the laws of sound economy or the laws of human action, good stewardship, and a whole lot more is coming to us, coming to you in September. It'll be Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2:30 Central Time in the afternoon. And I hope you'll be able to join us. It's free. We're not charging anyone. So there you have it. And feel free to put notices up in your church. Invite other Christian people, homeschool students in particular. You can make this available to those Christian people who are interested in good stewardship. You can register for it. You can go to visionviewpoint.com, the website, and you can there sign up. Well, we finally get to our lesson today, which is, well, about economics. What about economics? Like I said, economics is called the dismal science. Actually, just about any discipline is dismal. If you strip Christ out of it, if you atheize it, any course becomes dismal and often contradictory. In our course, you'll see what I do. As in our other courses, you'll see that I'm going to unite the scriptural foundation, illustrations from history. I want to put arms and legs, people's decisions on the principles we find in Scripture. So we'll have it historically based, but first and foremost, biblically based. And with that, we're going to study how economics can go astray and sound stewardship, like I said, entrepreneurship. Let's take a look at what happens in history if we depart from the Scriptures, or if we're just plain confused about the dismal science. I've often heard historians, and of course I have a chance to speak with them, those who I consider colleagues in the field, on historical matters. I have taught, as you, I'm sure, know, much on American history, world history, particularly Western civilization, church history, and ancient history. One of the things I hear frequently, in American history is George Washington can't get a break with our generation. He's made out to be everything from a Freemason scoundrel, which he wasn't. He attended one meeting because it had become transformed into a French Revolutionary club. And he went on record as condemning the Freemasons who had become the French Revolutionaries of France and drew the ire of same. It's said that he wasn't a great orator. Well, no, he actually was not. He was ashamed of his teeth. In those days, they didn't have the kind of dentistry that we have. And what about that oft-told story that he didn't take a salary, which is true, he didn't take a salary. He was wealthy by himself, his own wealth. He carried him through the war. But he did charge, and this is true, $15,000 in an expense account to the Continental Congress. $15,000 he wanted to be repaid. He asked for his expenses to be repaid, to be covered. $15,000 for one night's lodging and the grooming of his horse, grooming and care of his horse. $15,000, that's a pretty stiff hotel bill. Actually, I'm amazed that he was willing to be paid in Continental script because you see, the phrase not worth a Continental? The Continental Congress produced Continental script or Continental dollars. It inflated to the point where one night's lodging was about 15,000 Continental dollars. It would get much worse. It got to the point where farmers were defrauded, and that's what inflation does. It defrauds people. You see, many farmers would give their goods, sell their goods to the Continental Army, and they got paid in Continental script. Well, the Continental script was inflating. There might be a bushel of potatoes given to the soldiers, and they'd be paid 100,000 Continental dollars, a stack of Continental dollars like so. You know, all over the newly established United States, we won our freedom, of course. All over the United States, there were farmers with stacks, hundreds of thousands, in fact, into the millions of dollars, Continental dollars, in stacks. You know, one bill might say $100,000. So 10 of them would be $1 million. So you can see that the currency was destroyed in its value. In many barns throughout the United States, in many homes, there were stacks of these Continental dollars. Well, that shows you what inflation can do. The Bible warns about that kind of inflation. Isaiah chapter 1 speaks of inflation, writes the fact that one of the corruptions of politics, that in Jerusalem of his day there was inflation. It was compared to, well, your silver, your silver money's become dross, tin. Your wine is diluted with water. So the currency, let's say coinage, it was actually not exactly that. Your coinage was tin or some cheap metal like that, like iron. It had moved from silver to something that was cheap. And of course, you'll find in our course, for example, you'll find why it takes more and more and more of those to buy a loaf of bread. Why would that be? Well, we're back to that law of supply and demand. You know that in the scriptures, the laws of supply and demand are found. If I were to ask you where they are, could you find them for me? It's not going to help you to find a concordance. It won't help you. You've got to know the concept to look for. If you don't get it, well, then you just might take a verse that you think you understand that has a monetary application, and most of them do, and misread it, misunderstand it, hurting your own stewardship, and wondering why God isn't answering your prayer, or wonder why you're getting hurt. America did that, in fact. America has given money to people around the world, disaster after disaster. You know that? I know that. We've also subsidized an entire welfare class to the point where welfare recipients are more numerous than those that are earning a living. The Bible spoke to that generation back when, and there are many passages like this. It says, "He that hath pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again." So Christian people, the church is teaching that, passages like that, realized that they could give, and God would, they believed, give what they had loaned out. Well, there's a little bit more to that in the poor laws of the Bible. If I were to ask you, when you loan money, when you give money, you loan money, or you receive money, Do you know what the Bible, what God says should go with that money? What are some of the parameters surrounding it? And God makes a distinction between those who receive money and are poor and are in desperate circumstances. Those that receive money where they need help to build a business, let's say, but they're not poor. And those that receive money and it's a gift. The Bible treats those differently, or could, depending upon circumstances. Let me give you an example. It is commonly taught, Psalm 15, for example, is often cited, that, well, the question is, who will dwell in thy holy hill? And it begins to answer that, he that walks uprightly. That sets the tone for the psalm, Psalm 15. And it goes, he that doesn't backbite with his tongue, or does evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his neighbor. There's a number of things that shows what an upright man is. Christian people are not backbiters. Christian people don't take up a reproach. In whose eyes a vile person is condemned. Well, there's one you don't find too much. From the pulpits, we hear a lot about turning the other cheek. The Bible says he who is upright, in such a person's eyes, a vile person is condemned. That's a pretty strong word, by the way, vile. It does go on, though. It says he that honors them that fear the Lord. So you love those, you honor those that love the Lord, and a vile person doesn't look too good in your eyes. One more thing. He that puts not out his money to interest, usually is interest in the King James world. He doesn't put out his money to interest, nor takes reward against the innocent. It's an important contextual attitude. You see, the Hebrew is very contextual. The word neshek means interest. That's the Hebrew word here. And in this context, the Hebrew loves to develop several sentences to give you the meaning of any one of them. That's context. He that doesn't put out his money to neshek, interest. And he that does not take reward against the innocent. That's contextual. Why? Because in Deuteronomy chapter 23, we find that there is a loaning that can be done with interest. It says so. Thou shalt not lend upon interest to thy brother, interest of money, interest of food, interest of anything that is lent upon interest. Anything that's lent upon interest, that means a loan is needed. So it can be done with money, it can be done with food, anything where a loan is needed. Somebody needs clothing, like in Exodus 21. And then it says, see, before I begin, interest is not to be charged to a brother in need. But then it says, unto a foreigner, you may lend upon interest. That's Deuteronomy 23:20. But unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon interest, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to do in the land whither thou goest to possess it. So a brother in need, often called the poor, as in Psalm 15, and it couples it with another wrongdoing. There's a wrongdoing if you loan to a desperate brother in Christ upon interest. Now, you can give him a gift. That's not interest-bearing. A loan upon interest to a desperate brother. That's called abomination in Scripture. And so that you get the meaning in Psalm 15, it couples a wrongdoing, loaning on interest to a brother in need, with nor does he take reward against the innocent. Oh, you don't take reward against your brother in need. You don't take reward against an innocent person. It's a matter of justice or injustice. Now, the person that lives that way, according to Psalm 15, will never be moved. God will bless him. He's a man that honors, man or woman that honors, fears those, a brother, those that fear the Lord. And a vile person is condemned. Now, Neshek is nothing more than now watch this. Oh, let me couple it with another illustration first. When you go to the store and you buy a bag of apples, you know very well that the store bought them at a lower price and is selling you those at what they call the price, and you go and you buy it. It's already negotiated. That's the price they want for that. It has built into it the price they paid and the profit they're making. Interest is the profit on a loan. That's all it is. The reason God makes the distinction is because when your brother is in dire straits, interest is often compounded. If he's charged interest, now he has another problem, the bondage of compounding. And in our course in economics, you're going to find out that compounding of interest is a whole branch, has a whole number of implications in all sorts of areas of your work, of your stewardship, not just in loans. The compounding of interest is a principle from the price system which functions to warn entrepreneurs. The price system is a system of information. That's something that we all need to know. Something we'll highlight in the course, no doubt. But economics is not just about buying and selling. It's about information, discernment. That's why its stewardship is so important. We highlight these kinds of things in our coursework, but you have to understand that many are blindsided, not knowing these great truths. So feel free to tell your Christian friends, adults, and young people. They can come in and take the course, free of charge. We have seen now George Washington. How George Washington, that illustration marred his character, at least to historians. When in fact, I'm amazed that he was willing to be supportive of the Continental Dollar because it wasn't good for anything except lighting a fire. In the book of Job, and I'm sure you know the book of Job, at least the overall tenor of that book, the themes, Job is struck economically, isn't he? His cattle, his sheep, there is a consuming, a thunderstorm, a lightning storm, and he loses his great wealth. His children are lost in a catastrophe. His servants die, except for one here and one there that comes and tells him about the disaster. His wife tells him, curse God and die. You see, he lost due to Satan's attack upon him. He lost economically. Now, if you want to read the man's resume, Job, I can understand why Satan wanted jurisdiction, which he couldn't get unless God gave it to him. We've discussed that concept in the past. But chapter 29 of Job tells you what Job was like. Job was a civil magistrate. He was the elder in the, was a judge, but he's also an elder of prominence in the Moshav. It's a networking of, well, we might call them synagogues. That's a later term. The congregations of the Semitic people, the people that preceded Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Israel. They were Semites. They had the laws of God. And he was an elder, we call him an elder, in the Moshav, as it's later revealed in the Bible. He was influential in keeping the congregation of the Lord protected and well-informed. He apparently was a teacher. The young and the old honored him when he came into their presence. It shows you he had a wide audience. He's an instructor. And not just a few of them either. As a civil magistrate, as a judge, which was apparently his day job, he's a judge, and he condemned the bandit. He condemned the defrauder. He condemned the slaver, those that would make slaves of others. He upheld the widow. He upheld the poor in their distress. He upheld the orphan, the cause of justice to those who were vulnerable. He was a sound money man. That's right. He understood what money should be in God's eyes. Most magistrates don't understand that. Do you understand it? If I were to ask you, what was it historically that made money money? You might say, well, gold or silver. Not exactly. I didn't ask you that. I asked you what God says in His Word characterizes some commodity, note that, some commodity, such that it stands out and has marketing value apart from its own function. In other words, let's say it was oranges for a moment. Well, oranges are to be eaten. That's their function. But what if they became a money also? Were exchanged as money? No, they weren't. Gold and silver became a money in addition to the way in which they were used, say, in jewelry or other applications. Job understood that. So did Moses. So did the Apostle Paul. Paul uses terms, economic terms, when he speaks of the Holy Spirit in you. He's a down payment, earnest money on your inheritance, your eternal inheritance. Paul uses the term defrauding in 1 Thessalonians, which is what a Christian should not do. If any man goes beyond and defrauds his brother, in any matter, the Lord is the avenger of all such. I know Christians, purported Christians, who have defrauded their brethren right and left. The Apostle Paul warns that God will step in for those who have defrauded their brethren. These and many other terms are used, and concepts are used all throughout the Scriptures. One other thing about Job, if I can return to him for a moment. Yes, chapter 29, he's a magistrate. He lost that position, at least temporarily. Now, at the end of the book, he gets double back what he had lost from the Lord. In other words, Satan didn't have the right to be granted jurisdiction. God gave it to him, and God can do that. But God recognizes that Job and honors that fear of the Lord Job had, walking uprightly. He gave Satan jurisdiction over Job when Job had not deserved that. Job complains about that. Now, let me qualify that. We all deserve God's anger. But when God tells you can walk uprightly, He will honor you. He'll keep that covenant with you. It would appear, as Job said, he had broken that covenant with me, Job said. God appeared to recognize Job's argument. No, he did chastise him. The contest was for us to study. That's why Job was given that harshness. He was suffering for us. That's a whole story in itself. But understand, at the end of the book, Job is given double restitution. God treats what he did to Job as if he had stolen from Job. What if, in learning economics, Christians can learn how to apply rules of evidence better, how to understand better the political or the business entrepreneurship, or their own personal stewardship. How is wealth, for example, built? How is it lost? And how do you anticipate those vicissitudes of time and effort on the part of others as well as yourself? So yeah, we're talking about the course in September, but in this section on insights, the Bible recognizes that we must understand sound economy, oikos, house, pneumos, law, the rule of our home. That's economics. How we go about being good stewards. How we interpret our Bible, like Acts 4, and its use of Leviticus 27, and thousands of other places of the Scriptures where sound economy, sound stewardship shows up. We'll continue this insights on sound economy in our next lesson. May God bless you.
This has been Chokepoints Through Time with Dr. Wayne Sedlak. Visit us at visionviewpoint.com, where you'll find a host of articles, books, and videos designed to answer any questions you may have. Join us Tuesdays and Fridays for Chokepoints Through Time with Dr. Wayne Sedlak.